I have a panel of distinguished guests that I would like to now invite on stage. We have with us Carlos Martin-Novella, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. Ghislain Irakoze, who is the founder and CEO of Wastezon, a Rwandan clean tech startup that provides end consumers and recyclers with a waste management app. Abdi Lim, who's the founder and CEO of Purpose Plastics, and Pierre-Yves Poliquin, who's the Director of Multifaceted Performance, Veolia. Please welcome me in joining our panel. Do you want to come sit here? I think it would be easier. Just thank you. Thank you all very much for joining me. And I want to start with you, Carlos, because the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, could you just maybe help us understand what the conventions are about and explain that to our audience?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for having me today here. Those are three legally binding multilateral environmental agreements. This is a technical word. In practical terms, it's international pieces of law, it's international law. The Basel Convention addresses hazardous waste, and in particular the sustainable management of waste locally and the transboundary movement of waste as well. The Rotterdam Convention addresses the transboundary movement of chemicals. Whenever chemicals are banned in two different countries in the world, then there is a procedure to inform each other when one of these chemicals is going to move across borders. And the Stockholm Convention is about persistent organic pollutants. It's what people call the chemicals forever, where we try to identify them. There is a process to assess the characteristics, and then eventually, if they are listed under the convention, we have now 30-some listed, then they are banned globally, sometimes with some exceptions, temporary exceptions. And once they are banned, pile stocks are identified, destroyed, and moved to the next one. So it's three interesting pieces of international legislation, all of them very relevant for what we are talking here these days on climate change, of course.
Great. And writing the laws and passing them is one thing, and these conventions at least, and then the practicality of it is also like a whole different scenario. I just wanted you to explain why is the management of chemicals and waste an international problem, and what happens when importers close their ports to some of this waste?
Well, I can give you two examples, very recent examples on the Basel Convention waste. We saw what happens with plastics. Plastics are extremely useful. Just 50 years ago, there were not so many plastics. The computers were made on wood, you know, and I'm joking. And the cars were made on wood. Everything was made on wood. Then we had the plastics, and well, very useful. Things are lighter. They are easy to make, cheaper. But they have a problem that they are lasting forever almost. They are very long. And the production system in the world, the economic system, was not adapted to think what is going to happen with these products when they are not useful enough. And then we have these masses and masses of waste coming up. And the first reaction from many countries who were the first benefiting of this new industry was to dump things into the backyard. So a lot of waste, I don't want to treat it at home because it's cheaper to have the raw material before and then continue dumping the waste in developing countries, basically. So we saw how the waste was, plastic waste was put in big containers, sent to developing countries without any guarantees how they were going to be treated or how they were not going to be treated, and they're finished in the river streams, in the beaches, and in the sea. And when we want to realize, just few years later, the sea is full of plastics. And as you know, everyone says, more plastic than fish. So in that moment, the Basel Convention, the parties reacted and make an amendment to the convention that requires, well, first of all, some types of plastic waste is not allowed to be transported across borders anymore. So it's banned to be exported. And that helps. And also helps for climate change because less transport, less emissions due to transport. Then there were other types of plastic waste that are classified, and to have an export of it requires to have a prior informed consent from the importing country and the exporter. And this prior informed consent, that has to be a written certificate, needs to include a guarantee that these plastics waste are going to be treated in a sustainable manner. So they are not going to be dumped. And this sustainable manner is defined what we call with technical guidance that are negotiated in the convention, and we provide the footprint, the advice to parties on how they should manage this waste in the place of destiny. So altogether helps to have clear environment, more healthy environment, to minimize the transport. When transport is produced, then there is more clear materials that are requiring less processing afterwards, so also contributing to address climate change. This is an example. Another example, very recently, we have also an amendment to the Basel Convention regarding electronic waste. And well, how many telephones you have at home, and what happens with the telephone after 2 years when it's the upgrade? It's an enormous problem. It's a mountain of electronic waste being dumped in developing countries. And again, a very little reaction and very late reaction. But now with this amendment, any piece of equipment that has an electronic element, maybe a laundry machine, maybe a fridge, maybe whatever, in the world is going to be subject to prior informed consent and the same conditions on sustainable management of recycling or whatever afterwards. So there are two major things. And in the case of electronic waste, it's even more important also for the production. Because we know that for some elements of the electronics, they require some metals, very rare metals. And very rare metals that are becoming rarer, more difficult to find. And when you find them, it's not in many places where you can find it. And now they turn up that it's easier to find them in the dumps than in the fields. So it's what is becoming now what they call the urban mining. Mining in the rubbish dumps is more efficient from the economics point of view, from the production point of view, than to ask for the raw material from the country where they will have the benefits of having it. So the whole paradigm of why we have to address the benefits of addressing waste is not only because of health, it's not only because of environment, it's not only because of saving the seas, it's also because of the economy itself, because of the profits, because of the continuity of the products with batteries. We are again going to links to climate change. We are moving towards having more electric cars. Even the European Union has a deadline now to have everything electric. This will require a battery. But again, to make batteries, you need to have some metals. And metals that are very rare and are going to be very difficult to find. And I don't know for how long it's going to be possible to find these metals with the number of cars that will be required in the medium term. So again, to have a system where you can recycle these batteries is the only possible way forward for the industry, for the benefit of climate change. Again, linkages between waste management, climate change, I can lead you also linkages with biodiversity. The three, what they call planetary crises, are completely interlinked on the ground. Now we have different instruments that for historic reasons we're addressing each one of them from a different perspective. But when you look into the actual implementation of the ground, the three crises are closely interlinked.
Thank you for delineating that. And I see Ghislain and Ab both shaking their heads. Ghislain, I want to start with you to possibly reflect on some of the things that Carlos talked about. You're from Rwanda and Abdi, you're from Malaysia, both countries with serious waste issue. And maybe could you talk a little bit about the different categories of waste that are ending up in Rwanda, and what are the impacts of that on communities?
Okay, thank you. So in Rwanda, we launched Wastezon, so back in 2018. And most of the waste streams we're seeing on the ground are more of organic and inorganic waste. And most of inorganic waste, we find like a plastic waste, even though maybe just comparing to other countries, the Rwandan government has just put more efforts in eradicating plastic waste. But at the end of the day, we also saw another emerging stream, which is electronic waste, so which is one of our forecasts at Wastezon. So we launched a technology product which allows manufacturers to trace electronic materials in the value chain, ensuring its transparency in the value chain in the way that it can be brought back to manufacturing sites for establishing urban mining infrastructures. So it has been so effective because since 2018, we have managed transactions of over 400 tons of electronic materials And this is actually equivalent to over 3,000 tons of carbon emissions diverted. So it's so impressive to see how the whole value chain can actually come together to embrace the circular economy. But beyond electronic materials, there are also other waste streams which needs attention, especially organic waste, which is really a great asset for agriculture industry in Africa, and it's yet untapped. So for instance, in Rwanda, we generate over 3,000 tons of organic waste per month, but 80% of them actually ends up in landfill. We could see the major possibilities of leveraging such organic waste to provide compost to farmers who actually formulate the backbone of our Rwandan economy, but yet there are no infrastructures in place. And the private sector involvement is still on low level. So yeah, there are a lot of waste streams, but we need to rethink the way we restructure the value chains, the way we restructure private financing instrument to enable private sector actors to involve in this sector.
In Malaysia, it only started when China stopped receiving plastic waste imports, and Southeast Asia were heavily impacted. And from someone from Malaysia itself, we do not really have a proper waste management segment. We only have one bin, there's no 3 bins. And for us to be put in a position where we have to recycle plastic waste from other countries when we couldn't even handle plastic waste from our own country is just terrifying for me. And a lot of times, people forget that the plastics we consume for the past 50 years before, it's still here. But all the plans are all about, oh, this is what we're going to do about our plastic in 2050, and we're going to make our plastics recyclable until 2050, 2030, 2060. But what happens to the plastic waste that is currently on the ground? Approximately 80% of plastic waste is on the landfills or just on the floors, on the streets. 12% is incinerated, and the rest is the small menial percentage is recycled. So this issue is actually a global crisis itself, but it's not being put at that spectrum at the moment. It's transboundary. The supply chain it involves different countries, but at the same time, we all have different jurisdictions. So it's really a tough problem to solve.
And I know we'll talk a little bit about solution in the end, but could you just touch on how the Malaysian government has responded to this increase and what they're doing?
Well, this is tough for me. I think I can't really comment on that because free speech is not our best at the moment, but I could say that they're trying hard, but it's a whole collective effort from the communities, the governments, private sectors, but I want to focus on private sectors at this point and today at COP itself. We speak about Coca-Cola being the main sponsor, and it just baffles me that this is allowed because they're one of the top 4 global polluters for plastics. And the fact that they're able to greenwash through this platform is just incredibly ridiculous. Why do we allow this to happen when the UN is supposed to focus on reducing plastic pollution, one of the main agendas that we're trying to fight? We literally just passed the plastic treaty in UNEA 5.2 in March. And 8 months later, at COP27, it's like a F you in the face. We can still sponsor COP27. We do not have to make every UN agency happy. So, you asked about the Malaysian government.
Yes.
I can't really comment on that, but in the global perspective, this is what I'm seeing.
There's an issue there. Pierre, your company has announced strong commitment to an ecological transformation, and I just wanted you to reflect, based on what you've had from the other speakers, also how you are taking this process into account and ensuring that you stick to your vision and actually make it happen.
Maybe thank you for inviting me. Just to remind that Veolia is a large company in three fields: waste, water, and energy cycle. After the merger with Suez, we reached about 40 billion euro of turnover this year, and about 200,000 people around the world. Behind this merger with our competitor Suez, it's the idea to create the leader for the ecological transformation. So it was a true wish from our C.E.O. that we will have the tools and the opportunity and the footprint to elaborate more and more, because, as mentioned, the needs are everywhere: on water, waste, and energy. And maybe to stop to think about three business lines, but to increase the link between waste to energy, water to energy. And when I'm talking about water and waste, sometimes if you take the example of the sludge, for example, if you digest the sludge, you get methane. And methane you can transform in electricity or use it as biomethane. We make the calculation that in France, if we convert all the sludge issued from sewage treatment, it will offset the importation of Russian gas, just to illustrate how much it is important. But we need to change the regulation as well. So we are, as corporate, as private sector, strongly involved in this transformation. As mentioned, we will need the transformation of the people, because people are key, and of course to have the transformation as well of the regulation. Thanks in Europe, it's moving. We have new regulation in organics, so it will help to transform the organics inside biomethane in Europe. We have new regulation about export and things like that, so it will help to develop local solution. And we do believe at Veolia that local solution, local loops inside the territory is the future for the waste and for the water as well.
Thanks for that. And I wanted to pivot to this term that has kept coming up in some of the conversations that we even had before, which is about waste colonialism. And I would want Abe and Ghislain to respond to that. But Pierre, given your work in your company, I know that exporting waste plastic is legal, but do you think that big industrialized nations should be exporting plastic and other waste, even if it's legal?
No. For example, we have taken strong commitment at Veolia to recycle plastic. Mm-hmm. We have been doubling our capacity of recycling plant. So we're going from 300 to 600,000 tons end of the year. It was one of the 18 plans in this multifaceted performance, so that means the global objective of the group, including financial, people, nature, and for the ecological economy, it was really dedicated to plastic. Our customers, they want to have local sourcing for recycled polymer. I take the example of Danone in Indonesia. We partner with them to provide to them local recycled plastic. And we have example, of course, in Europe. We have example in China. We opened a new plant in Thailand, in Japan next year. So yes, definitely the big names mentioned, they have pledged themselves. They will not succeed to reach their target. But for us, it's really a matter of taking the local production, the local waste, and to transform it in recycling plastic for local use. And I think that's a big trend globally, and nothing will stop that.
Mm-hmm. Ghislain, do you want to respond to the comment about waste colonialism and how it impacts, what's it about even?
It's tricky just to call it waste colonialism because the whole systems are unstructured to accommodate circularity or circular economy. So in the value chain, we found manufacturers, we found consumers, maybe in between their distributors. So that's the green economy we know. But for circular economy, when, for instance, like redesigning the way we can return back all those materials to manufacturers, the value chain doesn't exist. Especially right now, it's informal, being composed by several informal key players, waste correctors. So I think what maybe developing countries need, it's more cooperation with developed countries. So we have seen like some practical case studies or practical business models which are emerging in African countries, ranging from repurposing, recycling, as well as remanufacturing. So manufacturers need to go down the field to look out for already agents who are on the ground who are remanufacturing or recycling their products. So there is collaboration opportunities that could be tapped in. For instance, at Wastezon, we're a technological company which is providing technology services to enable manufacturers to trace materials. So we don't provide recycling, like actual recycling services, just more of like coordinating the value chain. So we have seen like practical and successful businesses which are emerging on the ground. So how can we create such collaboration between developing countries and developing countries, especially in the waste management value chain? And beyond that, we also need to give the power consumers. But consumers at the end of the day, they don't have power or a say at the table when it goes to such a conversation. Most of the products are not designed for circularity. So we have seen like movements emerging in European countries, in the UK, where they're advocating for rights to repair. So most of electronic products are not designed to be repaired or last longer. So how can we revisit such policies which enable redesigning for circular economy, giving the power to consumers to able to have such extensive lifetime of the products? So we just need collaboration as well as restructuring how things are operating. And such collaboration should just be win-win. So it doesn't need to be viewed in more of like aid, donation view mode. So we just need to redesign it as a business, win-win business collaboration system where African countries can give you secondary raw materials you can actually use to redesign or remanufacture your products, because those are resources going in African countries. And as a manufacturer, you need responsibility. You have a responsibility to take them back. But at the end of the day, it has to be win-win. So you redesign the business model in a way that you can actually get secondary raw materials from consumers. From an economical point of view, it's actually enabling you to get materials, secondary raw materials, cost efficiently, while also even diverting such waste from going to landfill.
You've already taken us into the solutions part of the session. Abdi, do you want to respond to the waste colonialism aspect?
Definitely. I would also like to comment that just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. And a lot of times, it's the developed countries taking advantage of developing countries just because they don't have that law in place. And this is also interconnected with the political situation and also the current economics of the country. Some countries really need money, and some countries don't really have a stable political situation. And a lot of developed countries are taking advantage of those situations. And that's why plastic waste is getting imported. This is one of the reasons. And I could tell you from my personal experience in Malaysia, what I saw is a black market. The recycling business is a black market. The local business in Malaysia, they would accept plastic waste from the UK, tax rebate from this side, and they get tax exemption in our home country as well because it's labeled as recycling. But how do you know it's being recycled? Who is doing the checks and balances? And for a country that is still developing, there is no one answer to it. And when we talk about waste colonialism, there's so many factors to it. We are a developing country. Recycling is unfortunately not on the top of our priority. Climate change is, it's not even on the top of our priority. And we actually have our general election soon in a couple of days. I don't see any single party putting the climate change agenda on the top of their priority. So this tells a lot about a country itself. And this is just Malaysia. It happens to all of the developing countries. And that's why, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical.
Thank you for that. We'll open up for questions in a minute, so keep thinking about those questions. But I want to, before that, I want to get into the solutions aspect of this, and maybe Abdi, even start with you about your approaches in terms of like how do you tackle the deluge of waste that is now being diverted either from China or elsewhere and into Southeast Asia?
Okay, definitely. I would talk about Purpose Plastic right now. It's an initiative, social enterprise that I founded. Our main aim is to transform single-use plastic into long-term plastic. And a lot of times, a lot of plastic recycling enterprise business, they will have to invest in a lot of capital and a lot of capacity to actually set up a plant. But what I do is to be in touch with the community so that they could actually repurpose every single type of plastics. It doesn't have to be HDPE, it doesn't have to be pure. And the reason why I tackle this issue with this approach is I realized that only 9% of plastics can be recycled. And to recycle a polymer has to be pure itself. A triangle 5 plastics, a triangle, which is the plastic label that you find under your bottle, it can only be recycled if it's a pure polymer. If it has additives, it has coloring, or it has other sort of contamination itself, it's impossible to recycle because it's already chemically bonded. And it baffles me to see that so many companies still put the labels on the back of their products saying like, this is recyclable. But no, it's not. It's not the entire thing that can be recyclable. You have to dismantle all single parts of that one packaging to be able to recycle 100%. And that's why Purpose Plastics, what we did is we are tackling plastic waste that are not being able to recycle into long-term use, a long-term plastic product.
Yeah.
By adding other aggregations. This is another sort of, this is a long other chapter if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, and Pierre, just listening to Abe there, companies like Purpose Plastic, they focus on like actually doing the work, so, but just thinking globally, if she's working in one country or Ghislain is working in one country, but I want you to sort of help us think about, this issue on a global level. How do you make sure that we stop the cycle or make it less distractive? Are there better ways that we can do this?
My conviction is clearly that waste is a local issue. So it's it can be a local nightmare, as it has been mentioned, or it can be a local opportunity and resources. The vision we are developing is that there are loops now. We have the technology. Sometimes we are lacking of customer or pricing to make it completely affordable, but I think solutions are now affordable and implemented. We have bottle-to-bottle plant in Irakoze. We have a very impressive sorting center to sort the plastic, as it mentioned, but it needs huge collection because at the end they are industrial plants. So I would say the question is really the question mentioned that at one moment we need to have a state, we need to have a behavior of the citizens, we need to have the private company and a regulation, and each time the regulation is moving forward, we are progressing. That's the case of Europe. So I think that's, and I have example in developing country. I mentioned Danone. We have been working a lot on some other country to see how can we source local plastic to develop local use. So at the end, that's what we try to implement. It's really depending on opportunities, people, partner, and things like that. But yes, the solution do exist, and it's up to all the parties to implement them. So I don't know if you want me to elaborate more on some subject, but
No, I was going to actually pitch it to Carlos. I mean, in terms of, the companies doing the work versus, how can they also apply the conventions and make sure that, governments and private sector and like the entire chain is working together to actually ensure that the destruction is reduced?
Well, from the outset, there is a principle, there is the stated corporate responsibility. So companies, when they are producing a product, has the responsibility that is not to create damage, not to create damage to human health, not to create damage to the environment. And in the case of waste, there is obvious ways to do it. The same way that you have the whole chain from the factory to the distribution to the consumer, and goes the center of distribution and retailers and so on, and the companies has a perfect way to organize this way out. They have to organize the way in, the way back. So it's very simple. It's only the will to do it, and then of course have to internalize this in the market. Maybe some regulations can help to have an incentive on how to do it. In the case of plastics, maybe when there is I see some legislation in some countries promoting the use of recycled plastic, the pellets that are used, then when any product needs to have a proportion of this recycle, this can help countries or companies to think how to get these products back to them. It's an important thing to do. On the other hand, I think it's an important way to see what is the responsibility of the authorities. So it's to say that some governments or some people could think, okay, no, this is the companies, and it's just let the market to go. Okay, yeah, this may or may not. We know in some cases where companies have committed themselves to some objectives, and this has not happened. And we know in our own convention how chemicals forever, that has been discussed for decades until we got the proofs that they were killing people by the thousands or hundreds of thousands. And then finally these chemicals are listed. The companies knew it. So they are very good companies, but you don't need to assume that all companies are going to be good. No? And we rely on the goodwill of some of the champions that are able to move, to show the way, to change the systems, and basically can even run out of the market to those who are not following the system, because the capacity, the volume of what they are doing, simply they are making the path. But you don't need to assume that everyone is going to be good boys. So for that, you need a bit of the action of the authorities and the regulation. It's a combination of the two things.
Ghislain, in Rwanda, could you talk a little bit about what are the problems or the waste, the type of waste that you are looking to tackle, and what are the examples or the lessons, at least, that other companies, similarly trying to do the kind of work that you're doing? What can they learn from you, or at least from your experience?
So for us at Wastezon in Rwanda, we just dived in the whole circular economy just to restructure the value chains, because we believe the issues are actually the way the whole value chains are structured. Because at the end of the day, we found that most of products coming in African or developing countries are actually there to be consumed and then dumped. So I mean, generally, globally, that's how the whole system are structured. But at Wastezon, we designed a supply chain which are automated by machine learning technologies. So where consumers can sell back the electronic materials to manufacturers, but focusing on materiality, because if we are about to achieve circular economy, we need to reinvent the way we visualize the materiality of the products. Because manufacturers, to regain economically, they need to know what exact materiality, as well as even repurposing and recycling abilities that might come in on such materiality or materials being transacted. So through our platform, we designed a way that we can capture materiality of electronic materials For instance, knowing content of number of content of copper, which is on the product. So and price it according on global markets price of copper, just enabling both consumer and manufacturer to get price transparency, because it has to be a win-win business model for both consumer and manufacturer. Yeah, and we have seen like successful business stories between consumers, because so far we managed over 400 tons of e-waste materials transactions. So, and we could usually see transaction, for instance, like an average transaction on a mobile phone, which usually cost a consumer like a typical $160 mobile phone. So a consumer could actually get back at least $120 just by reselling back his or her electronic materials, so which was the mobile phone. So there is economical incentive being got by consumer as well as even manufacturers also tap into such a mobile phone to extract materials that it can actually repurpose or reuse. So this is something we applied on electronic materials, but it's so successful that we want to replicate into other materiality or materials. So for plastic consumable products, there's also a successful case study in Rwanda. So the Rwandan government, last year they banned the single use of plastics. Yeah. So, which is so successful in the way that manufacturers are rethinking the way they can use reusable packaging system. And the issue here, the challenge is actually coming up, is how can we trace back all those reusable plastic bottles for returning back at manufacturing side for reuse. So the problem is the value chain. As long as they are structured, there is a way of embedding a circular economy in the whole production and consumption systems.
I will open it to the audience, but could you just explain what circular economy means? It's a buzzword that you've all used in your statements.
Sorry, what word?
Circular.
It might work.
Yeah.
But I want to touch on the single-use plastic ban.
Yeah.
I was setting up a purpose plastic hub in Nairobi, Kenya earlier this year. And I found out that they have the single-use plastic ban in 2017.
Yes.
In 2017. Yeah. But at the same time, we have people from the Western part of this world saying that this is not doable. Single-use plastic ban is impossible. Why? Because the poorest will be the ones that are going to be suffering. But if Kenya can do this, why can't they do that? I mean, it's as simple as that. Yeah. And one of the solutions that they can look on is to look at plastics in a full life cycle approach, from the extraction, the production, the usage, and the reuse of it, instead of coming up with crazy marketing ideas of how to recycle this. And I would never, ever blame communities 100%, because we're being marketed on this product is good, that product is good. We want to consume that because we're being seduced into it. But at the same time, we do not have the choice to buy it without the plastic itself. And then we're being pushed, the responsibility is being pushed on us, the consumers, to recycle it. And if we don't, it's not their problem anymore, it's ours. So how do you feel about a billion-dollar company pushing the responsibility of plastic pollution onto the people they're trying to, onto the customers themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought, wasn't it the saying is always customer is always right? But, but I don't think they got that message. And you might say that we should just not consume this brand or that brand or this brand. But at the same time, we got to be realistic. Sometimes a good Coca-Cola is what we need.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll take some questions now. I can't see. There's a blinding light in my eyes. Yeah, there's a question here and there's a question there. Oh, okay. Oh, go for it.
Oh, me? Okay. So I guess as you're all talking, I'm wondering a lot about sustainable alternatives or more sustainable alternatives to plastic. And I'm wondering about the cost of those financially and also for the planet, like switching from plastics to paper, like how many trees have to lose their lives for that, and switching to, I guess, plant-based products, like what is the energy that has to go into that? And is that switch worth it, or do we just need to fully wean ourselves off of plastic? Or not fully, but more so wean ourselves off of plastic.
Do you want to take it?
Can you summarize? Sorry, I'm just...
Weaning ourselves off plastic, basically.
Sorry?
How can we wean ourselves off plastic, right?
Okay. I got the message. 20 years ago, it wasn't this, we weren't reliant on single-use plastic. Just 20 years ago. Why can't we do it again? Do you know why our grandparents, why our mothers have pickles? Why don't they just wrap it up on plastics to make it, live longer? To make it consume longer. There are ways already. We just have to go back to basics. And when we talk about eliminating single-use plastic, I'm not saying that it's bad entirely. Single-use plastic literally saved us from COVID. We use it when we need it and when it's reasonable. Right now, it's not reasonable at all. We're just drinking, throwing. And that is one of the consumer habits that I feel that we need to change.
Ghislain, do you want to respond to?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think I can just touch on Abdi's point, consumption habits, which needs to be redesigned. Because, single use of plastic might not be the issue at all, but we need to rethink the way it's actually used and reused. So, and both the consumer and manufacturer have long parts to play. For instance, for manufacturer, do they have value chains which are structured in a way that they can manufacture or redistribute those single use of plastics in a way that can actually be returned for maybe remanufacturing or reusing? Are those single-use plastics designed the way that it can last longer? Because design is the issue itself. Sometimes you might find the fiber itself or maybe the nature, materiality of such single-use of plastics are not redesigned or structured to last long, which is an issue for a consumer who might not adapt to that. So we need to restructure, rethink the system's way, but consumer and manufacturer, all of them have a role to play.
Have you guys realized some plastic bottles is squishy and some is hard? Do you realize that? Do you know why is that? Because it's additives. It's diluting the plastic polymers to make plastic production, plastic packaging cheaper. This is unethical plastic production by manufacturers. It started off with a huge country that I'm not going to name, but they started the trend of, I don't know, but they started this price war on plastic manufacturing. And when one company started doing this unethical, it's not illegal, unethical way of producing plastic packaging, and their prices are down here, everybody's up here, the market has to meet up. But there's no action being taken on this entity itself, because plastics as a transboundary issue is not, there's no legally binding instrument for us to tackle this problem. This is one of the main issues. And especially, just one last advice. If you see a squishy bottle, don't buy it, because you're literally going to be drinking macroplastic, microplastic, nanoplastic. Once it's under the sun, it's going to be in your water as well, and it will affect every single thing. It will affect life, plant, environment, animals. And when I was in Nairobi, actually, nobody was using small single-use plastic. They were all carrying this huge bottle of tumbler to refill and then bring back to their homes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's not the developing countries that have a problem with this. The developed countries are having this problem, but they're pushing on us.
Yeah. Okay, there was a question there.
Oh, hi. Karen from Mexico. Oh, to the lady in the panel, thank you so much for saying the uncomfortable truths. I have a question, a hopeful one. We're at COP right now, so there's a lot of promises, big promises being made. And in a hopeful point of view, I would like to know what will it take or how long will it take for the developing countries like mine to adopt this kind of economical circle solution, you know, to give up on plastic with all of these good intentions. If the people on the panel could summarize what will be the key action you believe that we'll need to do in these developing countries, also with the corresponding responsibility of the North Global to give up on plastics, and especially to give up on plastics that are damaging the health of those who live in the South Global like me. I would love to hear you. Thank you so much.
Maybe Carlos or Pierre, do you want to respond to what type of new systems we should be building, or at least the developed countries should be
I
building?
can give you a short answer. It's a collective effort from everybody. But I'm going to use Coca-Cola again. Because it used to be packaged in a glass bottle. Isn't that the solution? It's a cooperative between governments, private sectors, and I really do not want to blame consumers because we're being seduced into this entire consumer habit, but at the same time we're being pushed, the responsibility is being pushed on us. The solution is there. Why are we talking about economics when it's been done 20 years ago? Like, were our grandparents living in a really bad life the past 20 years ago? Is it better today? I think it's the same.
Carlos, do you want to respond to that?
Well, it's a complex question. How long can it take to change policy? You know, I was born in a country that went through a strong political process in the 70s. I was around 15 years old. And at that time, and basically the country changed the whole legislation, education, everything in 2 years. It was a political push. It was not a revolution, but it was a transition, a peaceful transition, but everything changed. Back. It was political will. We can see some countries are introducing single-use plastic legislation, bags legislation, quite relatively quick. It's matter of political will. Of course, some of them have some processes in the legislative structure that takes some months or some years. And you look at some groups, for example, the European Union, when they try to develop a new piece of legislation, a directive, when it takes co-decision with the European Parliament, usually it takes 2-3 years because of they have to go step by step. But you know, it's going to be 2 or 3 years. And after that, the new legislation is in force. When it comes to the international fora, those are things more complicated. Mm-hmm. With this plastics amendment to the Basel Convention, we did it from zero to have it done in 9 months. But never, ever happened before. This was completely extraordinary. And that was because of political will from countries to address something that was an undercrowded public to do something about. It was a small thing what we did, but it was done quickly. Now, we have the recognition that dealing with the plastic waste, when it is already waste, is not a solution, because it's going to be more and more and more waste, as I said before, and we are going to be swallowed by the waste. So there is an agreement in UNEA, in the United Nations General Assembly last February in Nairobi, to develop a new treaty on addressing plastic waste, trying to look at the upstream. So how to prevent plastics to become waste in first instance. This will be the solution. Mm-hmm. But in our experience, to have they have the self-imposed deadline of the end of 24 to have the negotiations completed. It's going to be tough. The first negotiation meeting is going to be in Uruguay just in 2 weeks' time. And if they have this international treaty agreed by the end of 24, they will need a ratification. It usually takes 1 or 2 years until countries are ratifying, and then the treaty enters into force. And then you have the period when the national authorities has to develop national legislation to match this international legislation. So when it comes to the cascading of international commitments into the national commitments, they take some years. But this is very important because in the same way that some countries can take some environment measures by their own, when there are measures related to international trade, and then the rules of international trade comes into the play, then you don't have other choice but to have international environmental agreements. And that takes time. But the beauty of the thing is that these agreements by default are made by consensus. So usually the level of ambition is for some a bit disappointing because you have to go to the minimum denominator, but at least it's something that every single country in the world agreed upon. And this is enormous power behind the agreements. So it's, my recommendation is engage in these international negotiations, try to have a level field of play among countries, so countries can start developing legislation and not affecting the fair trade flows. But at the same time, whenever you can do something by your own, don't wait and move as quickly as you can. And for many things, it's straightforward. They don't need to wait. They can do it straightforward.
Pierre?
Well, I think we have all the layer, and every layer is responsible of behavior. The state, the government, they have the tools, they have the regulation. We mentioned ban of plastic in Rwanda. It has been working because it has been enforced, full stop, really, and people are just cleaning the street very often. So I think it's a question of coherence, exemplarity. Plastic is oil. So at the end, if you import plastic, you can put a carbon price implementation at the border of your country. It's very simple to send a price signal to everyone and use this money to develop sorting solution inside your country. So the tools, if you look at what we have in the world developed, there are many tools. So it's a question of political will. It's a question of having some virtuous partner. You have some on the table in the panel. Because and clean and stop the trading agent and things like that, which are people making a lot of destroying country. But locally, I'm sure you find actors which are very reasonable and do their job very nicely. And then, of course, we continue to help the citizen to take the proper decision. So at one moment, of course, if you don't send a signal from the top, it's difficult to ask the people to change. But the toolbox, everyone knows about it. I mean, COP, if you look at all the people speaking everywhere at Sharm el-Sheikh, you got all the solutions you want. Just do it. Okay. And the question of doing it, it's not a question of, it's something else, I would say.
Okay. We're down to our last 2 minutes. I'll ask each one of you to reflect for 30 seconds on what your ask is of the leaders here this week. What would you like to see be done by the end of COP27? So, Eb, do you want to go first?
Okay. Talking about political will, we know Talking about political will, we know global politics creates a ripple effect everywhere. I'm from Malaysia. I follow politics from Singapore, Indonesia. I love Lee Kuan Yew. And the G7 countries brand themselves as the leader of the world. But at the same time, small issues like this, when Kenya has that ban, single-use plastic ban, and they're still fighting amongst each other that, is it good, is it bad, is it good, is it bad? Like, it can't be done because the poorest will suffer. So we need real leadership in this COP. We do not need labels, we do not need brands. Yes, the G7 countries are, leaders of the world, but it's all just until we see it.
Yeah. Ghislain?
System rethinking. So a lot of policies have been launched, but at the end of the day, there are no results on the ground. So we just need to revise the whole systems. So consumers are ready just to adapt to circular economy principle coming in. But are the policies or even actors in the whole circular economy industry, manufacturers especially, ready to embrace circular economy. So yeah, system rethinking, it's a new thing we need to embrace, both consumers, manufacturers, but at the end, readers, as she said, are they ready to adopt or revise all the policies on ground to support a circular economy transition? Thank you.
Carlos?
Well, at the end of these 2 weeks, it's always difficult to say at the beginning of the 2 weeks in a COP, but many things can happen. But from my side, I would like to see a recognition, starting a reflection and a recognition, and to be reflected, however, that addressing waste is good for health, is good for the environment, is good for the economy, is good for the society, and it's also good for climate change, because an important amount, significant amount of the emissions causing climate change are coming because of the mismanagement of waste. So if there is this recognition here that this is a win-win-win-win solution, it's a relatively small money involved, it's not barriers in front, it's not the petrochemicals, or it's not the hydrocarbons things there. It's something that nobody can argue against. Even in self-interest, nobody can argue against the benefits of addressing waste. Then this could come back to us with increased political will.
But
And
how
as I
can
said,
it be,
Okay.
sorry, how can it be a win-win-win solution when we're not on an equal playing field?
Pierre, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll
Should I give the last word
yes,
to the
I think
woman?
our time is very much up.
No, I think it's my second COP. I think every initiative is launched. I mean, as being part of corporate, my DNA is to do things. And the question is, all these initiatives, I mean, stop launching initiative. Just monitor them and do what they expected, what the expectation behind the initiative. I think there is so much intelligence here. If you go to each panel, you got many things analyzed. So everything has been written. Everything has been thought. So the question is a question of being determined to do it. And it is an individual and it is a collective challenge.
Okay. Carlos, Ghislain, Abe, Pierre, thank you all very much. This was really fantastic.